The nation is considering reinstating the auxiliary police system in its fight against shocking random attacks. At the end of this month, the infectious level of COVID-19 will be downgraded in Korea to the lowest level, which is the same as that for the seasonal flu, meaning a major change in related antivirus rules and support measures for patients. Having set the date, Japan is likely to start discharging Fukushima wastewater tomorrow afternoon amid concerns at home and from its neighbors. It's August 23rd, 2023. This is News Center. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. We start this evening with a change in the nation's police system as this country seems to be at war against violent crimes targeting random citizens. The Korean government is considering reinstating auxiliary police system that was struck down a few months ago, while restructuring the police force to put crime prevention at its top priority. They aim to have more officers available around the clock. Kim Do-yeon reports.
Following a series of shocking crimes in South Korea, the nation is reorganizing the police force while bringing back auxiliary police. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo and law enforcement-related ministers addressed the nation on Wednesday morning to lay out major plans for public safety.
We will prioritize law enforcement as a top police duty and reorganize police structures to strengthen capacity. To significantly enhance crime prevention capabilities, we will actively consider the reintroduction of auxiliary policemen.
The auxiliary police was once a mandatory military service option for South Korean men. However, it began downsizing in 2017 and currently has no members. South Korea's chief of police said the plan as of now is to have up to 8,000 auxiliary policemen, which would take around 7 to 9 months, and explained this is to have more officers available around the clock. The Prime Minister also reiterated pushing for life sentences without the possibility of parole for such crimes, while establishing regulations to penalize public threats and possession of weapons in public places. In terms of perpetrators with mental health issues, related policies are being reevaluated, including prevention, early detection, treatment, and daily recovery processes, with the ability of courts to admit people into mental hospitals strengthened. The government is also looking to take care of victims better. One-stop solution centers will be established to provide various forms of support, including legal, economic, psychological, employment, and welfare aid for the victims.
Aiding the victims is very important, and the budget is to be prioritized. Considering our nation spends billions hosting international events, we need to inject plenty of funds to support this.
Lastly, the government is encouraging people to provide more tips to police regarding threats to safety while it pledged to work more with related volunteers. The Prime Minister also pointed out some fundamental reasons for the recent rise in these serious crimes.
Several factors contribute to these heinous crimes, including social marginalization and the proliferation of relative alienation due to the rise of social media.
While this does not justify the crimes, he says the government is analyzing the reasons with experts to come up with measures to fundamentally fix the root of the problem. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Starting from the end of this month, South Korea will lower the infectious level of COVID to the lowest group 4, treating it in the same way as seasonal influenza. The authorities will no longer count daily figures and reduce related financial support. Our Choi Soo-hyung tells us more.
Starting from August 31st, the South Korean government will lower COVID-19's infectious disease level from Group 2 to Group 4. The Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency said on Wednesday that this decision was made due to a decrease in the spread of COVID-19 since the end of June, a reduction in virus risk, overall stable epidemic prevention conditions, and sufficient capacity within the general healthcare system.
The government made the decision to classify COVID-19 as a Group 4 infectious disease by examining those circumstances, and it plans to implement the second stage of measures according to the COVID-19 roadmap announced in March.
Furthermore, the agency stated that although one or two major and minor COVID-19 outbreaks are expected each year, most countries worldwide have already been managing COVID-19 within their general medical systems. The decision means the focus now will shift from counting daily case numbers to protecting high-risk groups. The downgrade from Group 2 to Group 4 means there will be no more daily reporting of confirmed case numbers, which had been going on for 3 years and 7 months. Also, under Group 4, people no longer need to report COVID-19 infections within 24 hours, nor do they need to isolate. Instead, the government plans to operate a more precise monitoring system to observe the COVID-19 trend on a weekly basis. However, the officials said that even with the transition to Group 4, there are still ongoing concerns about new COVID-19 variants.
The greater the number of transmission, the greater the chances of occurrences of yet another new variant. In that regard, we should also keep a close eye on what can come from purely just this high numbers of daily new cases, not just within our nation, but in other countries as well.
The KDCA said that masks will still be required for the time being at infection-vulnerable facilities such as hospitals and nursing homes. Additionally, support for COVID-19 diagnosis and treatment costs, operation of screening clinics, and the supply of vaccines and treatments will still be provided free of charge for now. The government stated that it will manage the epidemic situation in a stable manner going forward. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
Amid criticism at home and from its neighbors, the first batch of Fukushima water is likely to be released tomorrow afternoon. A test to see if the levels of the radioactive substance, tritium, meet the safety standard is currently underway. Our Lee Jae-yeon has this report.
The discharge of Fukushima wastewater will likely start on Thursday at around 1 p.m. That's according to Japanese news outlet Kyodo News, which reports that the Japanese government and the Tokyo Electric Power Company are deciding on the schedule. An inspection is underway to decide whether the wastewater meets the safety standard when it comes to tritium levels. The Tokyo Electric Power Company on Wednesday said that it has sent 1 ton of wastewater to the dilution equipment late on Tuesday, diluted with seawater to check the concentration levels of tritium. Levels of tritium, a radioactive substance that cannot be separated from water even after applying the advanced liquid processing system, should be below 1,500 becquerels per liter. Kyodo News reports that the result of the test is expected to come out before Thursday, and if the standards are met, TEPCO will release the water as originally planned, and around 460 tons of diluted wastewater will be discharged daily for the next 17 days. Meanwhile, multiple Japanese media outlets report that even after the release, the final goal of completely shutting down the Fukushima nuclear power plant may take a long time. Asahi Shimbun on Wednesday said that the wastewater tank will be removed after the discharging process, and the nuclear fuel debris from the power plant will be stored. Around 880 tons of fuel debris is expected to be generated from the plant's 3 reactors. In addition, reports also suggest that the Japanese government hasn't decided on how it will manage a large amount of fuel debris, and measures to prevent wastewater from rain and other means are yet to be put in place. Mainichi Shimbun also said that the radiation levels differ by each tank, and 70% of it does not meet the safety standards, meaning that a complete release may take longer than expected. One of the editorials in the newspaper also advised that the Japanese officials should, quote, face a reality that it's practically impossible for Japan to completely shut down the nuclear power plant by the year 2051. Lee Jae-hyun, Arirang News.
China has given the go-ahead for North Korean airline Air Koryo to schedule commercial flights between Pyongyang and Beijing. However, according to Reuters on Wednesday, China's state carrier Air China has not been granted approval to resume flights to and from North Korea, as the regime has not yet responded to China's requests. Air China has not been operating its flights to and from the north since January 2020 due to the pandemic. On Tuesday, Tuesday, an Air Korea aircraft landed in Beijing for the first time since China applied border closures of its own over 3 years ago. The aircraft then returned to Pyongyang with North Koreans who had been stuck in China during times of the pandemic. The U.S. Commerce Department has removed Chinese entities from its export control unverified list ahead of the upcoming trip to China by its secretary. Beijing is reportedly seeking cooperation with Washington in terms of trade. Or Lee Eun-hee has more.
U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo on Tuesday, ahead of her trip to China next week, met with Chinese Ambassador Xie Feng. During the talks, the Chinese ambassador asked the U.S. for increased cooperation and joint efforts to stabilize relations. Last week, the Chinese government stopped the publication of data on its soaring youth unemployment amid concerns that it would reveal new weaknesses in the recovery of its country. China also cracked down on corporate due diligence for firms operating in the country, halting the flow of information to overseas businesses. Accordingly, Jake Sullivan, the White House National Security Advisor, has called on China to be more transparent about the state of its economy, stating that the United States doesn't want the Chinese economy to tumble. Sullivan told reporters in Washington during Tuesday's online briefing that transparency is important as it would help the rest of the world make sound economic decisions. He said that Secretary Raimondo looks forward to constructive discussions with Chinese officials and U.S. business leaders, and that the trip is not meant to change China nor the United States. Raimondo's trip to Beijing and Shanghai will take place from August 27th through August 30th. Meanwhile, in a bid to further normalize bilateral trade with China, the U.S. Department of Commerce announced Tuesday local time that it has removed 27 Chinese entities from its export control unverified list. The Chinese Commerce Ministry welcomed the decision, saying that the move is in line with the common interests of the two sides. Lee Eun-hee, Arirang News.
China's stuttering economy is becoming a major threat to the global raw materials market. That's according to Bloomberg on Wednesday, saying Beijing's economic slowdown and weakened credit market threaten the country's steady growth, as well as its demand for raw materials as the world's biggest buyer. A seasonal revival in Chinese demand has gained some upward momentum as fuel spending has increased post-COVID-19. However, it says as the downward spiral of deflation, sluggish imports, and a prolonged property market slump continue there, uncertainties still loom over the raw materials market. A nationwide air raid evacuation drill involving citizens was held today for the first time in 6 years as part of the ongoing 4-day Ulji civil defense exercise. The drill focused on prompt evacuation scenarios in the event of missile provocations, among others. Our Song Yeo-jin was at one of the sites.
For the first time in 6 years, South Korea on Wednesday carried out a nationwide air raid evacuation drill. This to enhance the nation's readiness against potential airstrikes like nuclear missile attacks, cyber intrusions, and drone terror. The same drill was carried out in May, but only at schools and public institutions. This time, it included the general public, except regions designated as special disaster zones due to the impact of this year's heavy rainfall. At 2 p.m. sharp, the country came to a standstill with the blaring of the minute-long air raid warning siren. Citizens swiftly made their way to nearby safety shelters like subway stations and basements.
So out of the more than 17,000 evacuation shelters nationwide, people can find the nearest ones on the Emergency Ready app like this, as well as the standard mobile navigation apps and also the National Disaster and Safety Portal.
To minimize disruption and inconvenience, hospitals, subways, trains, airplanes, and vessels operated as usual. But commuters on subways and trains were required to remain inside the stations for 15 minutes. During this time, they had the chance to learn CPR and take a look at counterterrorism equipment. Drivers were required to park on the side of the road so they could listen to safety instructions through radio broadcasts. For non-Koreans, the Interior Ministry distributed leaflets in 8 different languages at airports, immigration offices, and hotels across the country.
But every month we have like a test of sirens every first Sunday, but it's not like that we have to run to underground. It's like only like a siren and that's it, but nothing like more.
At 2:15 p.m., with the issuance of the guard alarm, people were allowed to leave the shelters, but with a sense of caution. 5 minutes later, the alarm was lifted, meaning that the 20-minute drill came to a close. When the next one will be held will be decided either late this year or early next. 송유진, Arirang News.
The government and the ruling People Power Party today discussed next year's budget, seeking fiscal soundness while strengthening the welfare of the socially vulnerable and parents with newborns. Our Kim Jong-sil reports.
The South Korean government and the ruling People Power Party decided to seek fiscal soundness next year while securing more of the budget for public welfare.
Next year's budget plan is to maintain the spending at a low level by tightening belts, while providing more support for the socially vulnerable and securing public safety to prepare for a better future.
The ruling party said as next year marks the 3rd year since Yoon took office that it's time to give tangible results to the public.
It's important to spend people's tax money as carefully as my own money, especially to support the socially underprivileged.
The government and the ruling party have also decided to raise the monthly financial support for parents with newborns from the current 700,000 Korean won to 1 million won, or around $750. And for children that are 1-year-old, subsidies will be raised from the current 350,000 won to 500,000 won, or which is roughly $370. It also plans to cover full tuition fees for children from low-income households and increase the low-interest loans for college students' living expenses to around 4 million won, or about $3,000 per year, up more than 10%. There will also be new 101 care services for those with severe developmental disorders. Financing for regional major businesses was also discussed. Securing a route for the KTX bullet train link from Incheon, as well as an early opening of the GTX-A train in Gyeonggi-do province, were also reflected in spending. The government plans to submit the final bill to the National Assembly on September 1st after a cabinet meeting next week. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
There is an exhibit in central Seoul taking visitors on a journey through the history of Hallyu, South Korean popular culture now recognized around the world. Where did it start and what brought it to its current point? Our Shin Se-byuk takes a closer look.
Where did the Korean wave, or Hallyu, start? A special exhibition entitled The Pop Culture We Loved and Rise of the Korean Wave, currently taking place at the National Museum of Korean Contemporary History in Seoul, sheds lights on the history of Korean popular culture. This focuses on Hallyu's growth within the context of modern history.
We took the global approach because K-pop or drama or movie, they didn't exist our history, Korean history, before the modern and contemporary period. They came from the Western societies and from other parts of the world.
Korean pop culture started back in the 1950s and 60s when American pop culture was introduced in the country. Final records for music and Hollywood movies arrived through U.S. military bases in Korea. The first album of the Kim Sisters, the first Korean female singing group to make their career in the United States, also dates back to this time. From the 1970s, Asian pop culture such as Hong Kong films and Japanese cartoons captivated Korean audiences. For those who lived through the era, the exhibition evokes nostalgia. And for those who didn't experience that time, it offers a fresh perspective.
It brought back some sweet old memories. It's good to walk through the history of the Korean wave.
My parents and I, we each lived in different times. It's fascinating to see how we have these different cultures.
And finally, it highlights how these overseas cultures evolved into the global Korean wave phenomenon.
Here you can dive into Korean pop culture and even take a trip through time with a variety of interactive experiences.
Visitors can listen to vinyl records that were once played on turntables at Sasibong, a famed music venue in Korea back in the 1960s. They can experience idol dance routines alongside young dancers from Europe and Asia. And through AR, they can immerse themselves in scenes from Korean dramas. From singing rooms to creating their own movie posters, the exhibition offers visitors opportunities to become part of the living Korean wave. Beginning its run in July, the exhibition has already attracted over 60,000 visitors. It will remain open until September 3rd. 신새벽 아리랑 뉴스.
More rain is forecast to drench the nation until tomorrow. A lingering low-pressure system will bring heavy downpours for western regions and the surrounding areas. For parts of the Seoul metropolitan area and western coastlines and Jeju Island, a heavy rain warning is currently in place. As for the amount of rainfall, severe downpours are expected for Jeju Island with up to 200 millimeters in the forecast. For northern and central regions, including Seoul, up to 150 millimeters are expected. Chungcheongdo province and southern regions will see up to 120. At times, local downpours of 30 to 60 millimeters per hour may batter some regions. There is a high risk of landslides and flooding as the ground has gotten weaker from previous downpours. The good news is that the extreme heat will subside with the help of cold showers. And rainy spells will dominate nationwide for the morning. Seoul will be starting off at 25 degrees Celsius. Daytime highs won't be rising too much. Seoul and Busan will peak at 28. Gwangju 29. Gyeongju will be topping out at 30 degrees. And this weekend, inland regions will take a brief respite from the rain for next week. Another round of nationwide rain is in the forecast. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world. And that is News Center for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.
Welcome. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
하나,
하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, look my way. Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.
Busan, Korea is already reaching the entire world. Like ocean waves that travel far and wide. It's Busan, the perfect World Expo city. Transforming our world, navigating toward a better future. World Expo 2030, Busan, Korea.
안녕하세요. 저희는 부스입니다.
Hello everyone, it's Wednesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung.
North Korea is going to retry launching a military reconnaissance satellite sometime between Thursday and the last day of August. Now, such a launch window overlaps with the annual Ultra-Freedom Shield exercise between South Korea and the U.S., and it's not long after the trilateral summit between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo. The regime's leader has also reportedly inspected a soaring strategic cruise missile being launched from a small vessel. What can be said about the timing of North Korea's such moves? What are other North Korean issues that should be looked at? For this, we invite Dr. Ko Myung-hyun, Senior Fellow at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Dr. Go, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
And we also have Michiel Hueben, a Dutch member of the European Parliament. Mr. Hueben has been studying North Korea and made 3 visits there between 2014 and 2017. Good to see you, Mr. Hueben.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us. Now, Dr. Go, first question to you. North Korea has notified Japan of its plan to launch military reconnaissance satellite between this Thursday and the last day of August. Now, what can we say about the timing?
Well, so there are multiple layers to North Korean actions usually, and then we know that this is taking place amidst the trilateral meeting in Camp David, as well as the ongoing, actually started this week, the joint military drills between United States and South Korea, the Ultra-Freedom Shield. But I think the timing. One of the reasons why North Korea has chosen this particular timing is probably because of the September 9th, the day that celebrates the foundation of North Korea. It's an important event for North Korea as usual, and they are likely to hold a parade. And also, North Korea needs to celebrate. And I think they need a lot of reasons for celebration right now because North Korea is in an economic crisis, and clearly Kim Jong-un is not very happy with the progress being made or lack of thereof in the economic front as well as the military front. And we know that the North Korea tried the testing this space vehicle called the Cheonrima-1 last May. So it's almost exactly 3 months ago that North Korea tried to launch Cheonrima, but they failed. So I think they need to make up for it. And so if they can somehow succeed this time, then it's going to take place on the eve of the September 9th anniversary of the State Foundation Day. And then Kim Jong-un's face will be saved, and then they'll be able to have a reason to celebrate.
Right, I see. So it's because of the day of celebrating the foundation of North Korea. Dr. Go, before the warning, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, he visited the Navy unit, and he has reportedly inspected the strategic cruise missile test, right? But South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff pointed out that it is not a strategic cruise missile, but rather a short-range anti-ship missile. What are the difference between these two?
Well, with the so-called strategic cruise missile, is that, the attribute that determines whether a cruise missile is strategic or not is a range. So the North Korea has claimed that the so-called Arrow 2, the strategic cruise missile, has flown 2,000 kilometers for 2 hours, I believe, and making a figure 8 over the EC. So this is a pattern of autonomous cruise missile that the other countries have also developed. So because of the range, North Korea's claim that it's a strategic cruise missile. But then on the other hand, the anti-ship cruise missile has a much shorter range, usually about 200 kilometers or so. And it's a much more about established technology. It's been around for decades, and North Korea has in its possession hundreds of them. So that's the reason why I think there's a key difference between claiming success of the strategic cruise missile, which North Korea is currently developing, and launching an anti-ship missile, which has been developed a long time ago. So if what North Koreans are claiming is true, then it will mark a major milestone in North Korea's weapons development roadmap. But then it clearly, there are indications that the North Koreans are probably faking this claim. Because again, I think it has to do with the timing of the September 9th. It's the eve of the September 9th State Foundation Day. And North Korea has to have many reasons to celebrate, which is lacking right now.
Right, I see. Now, Mr. Hueben, the JCS also pointed out that they believe the missile failed to hit its target, while Pyongyang said it rapidly hit the target without any error. Now, if the JCS is correct, why is North Korea making such an exaggeration?
I always call North Korea the nuclear streaker or nuclear exhibitionist, so to say. While many countries that have secretly pursued nuclear weapons or ballistic missiles have remained quite secretive about it, and North Korea is always very open and showing off to the world. Now, why is that? That is because they want to be perceived by the world as this erratic and dangerous regime, ready to push the button for nuclear war and being able to hit any target they want anywhere in the world, especially the US mainland, of course. They believe it gives them leverage, it gives them credibility on the world stage, and more importantly, they believe that the world is scared of them. So for the North Korean government, it's in their interest to have as much credibly dangerous deterrent as possible. And that is why they exaggerate, and that is why they continue to showboat their nuclear and ballistic missiles program.
Right, I see. Now, Dr. Go, so one of the main reasons for North Korea's such move was, like you said, because of the September 9th, the day of the celebration of the Foundation Day, but also the Ulchi Freedom Shield between South Korea and the U.S. could also be the reason, right? So what are the noticeable points of this year's exercise?
So so one of the major difference between this year's Ulchi Freedom Shield and last year's is the size. There are more exercise components this time around, and also there are more other like the allied countries sending observers and more about nominal participation in the exercises. But in terms of qualitative these aspects of the exercise, there are addition of two major exercise components this year. One is the participation of the U.S. Space Force. There's a detachment of the U.S. Space Force called the U.S. Space Force Korea, and they are, they've been around for a while in South Korea, working jointly with the USFK and also the South Korean forces. But then this is the first time that the USFK and South Korea are making very clear that the Space Force has a notable role in the joint military drills. And it makes total sense because clearly after the Washington Declaration earlier this year, there's been a change of a tone in terms of characterizing the joint military drills between South Korea and the United States. If previously the joint military drills was more about deterring North Korea in the conventional sense, meaning like a non-nuclear aspect of North Korean threat, ever since the Biden administration and the South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol agreed to essentially focus more on the nuclear and missile threat from North Korea, there's been more highlight given to the deterrence aspect of joint military drills focused on the missiles and nuclear front. And the reason why the Space Force is very important is because the most important component of the nuclear deterrence against North Korea is not the nuclear weapons per se, it's the ability to surveil and then follow and detect and then track North Korean missiles. And those sensors are mostly based on space. That's the reason why the Space Force role in defending South Korea is very important. So I think the United States and South Korea want to highlight this aspect and then send a message to Pyongyang about it. Another component that's that's new to this year's Ulchi Freedom Shield is the exercise to prevent the spread of misinformation or disinformation. So there's this fear that if there's a contingency breaking out in the Korean Peninsula, North Korea might make use of this information to sow confusion. And as well as essentially rattle the public opinion, therefore multiplying the threatening aspect of North Korean capabilities. So the information aspect is very important in this year's joint military drills.
Right, so we could say the exercise has become much more comprehensive.
Exactly.
Right, I see. Now, Mr. Huevin, let's tap on to agreements made during the Camp Davis Trilateral Summit as well. The three countries decided not only to cooperate in conventional security areas, such as having annual joint military exercises, but also they agreed to collectively address illegal cyber activities by North Korea and enhance cooperation on human rights issues. What does such extensive cooperation mean?
Until now, Japan and South Korea working together on even basic cooperation would have been quite difficult, mainly because of historical disputes and irritants. But now seeing them working so closely together, so extensively, the Camp David summit really showed that the world is moving towards what I call this blockization of geopolitics, where countries are more and more forced to align their strategic interests. Only a few years ago, we saw a policy of rapprochement from South Korea and the United States towards North Korea. We saw a policy of nuclear containment. But after these talks collapsed, after the war in Ukraine, after we seeing the relations between the United States and China deteriorate, we now see that North Korea is investing more and more in their relations with the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation. On the other hand, we see South Korea and Japan moving ever more closer, not only with their relations towards the United States, but also in order to secure their own geopolitical interests in the Indo-Pacific region. So when it comes to North Korea, it doesn't really surprise me that South Korea and Japan are working much more closely together on what they consider to be their biggest immediate threat in the region.
Right, I see your point. Now, Dr. Go, another noticeable part of the Camp David Trilateral Summit was the document on commitment to consult. Now, how did you see this document, and will it be able to play a strong role in deterring North Korea?
So the commitment to consult wasn't the only document issued at the Camp David summit. There are two others, probably more lengthier and more important ones, such as the spirit of the Camp David, also the principles of Camp David. And then the recurring theme, or like a phrase that occurs over and over across these three documents, happens to be the commitment to consult among the three countries, Korea, Japan, and the United States. So the commitment to consult in this case, the consulting part is in fact consulting, three countries are essentially promising to consult with each other in case of a threat, contingencies, security-wise, emergencies in the region. And then, so in a way, there's I would say, duty or so to say obligation on the part of the three countries. But then this is talking about, we're talking about consulting about the security situation rather than consulting, joining forces together to deter militarily against the threat. So this can be seen as a very confusing part of the agreement that reached at the Camp David. But then this, in fact, is a very common component of any mutual defense treaty. So you can, when you look at the mutual defense treaty between South Korea and the United States, between United States and Japan, as well as in NATO collective security architecture, there's a commitment to consult in each one of these treaties. So this essentially marks a policy discussion obligation among the members, among the signatories of the mutual defense treaty, essentially obliging these countries to recognize if there's a threat to any of the allies or partners. So this is a lower level security commitment, so to speak. But then what's interesting about the separate document called the Commitment to Consult is that it's a shorter document compared to two other documents, the Principles of Camp David, as well as the Spirit of Camp David. And what it does is clarifies the scope of this obligation to consult. There's no way they have to issue, the three countries have to jointly issue this separate document. It was because there are some concerns that this commitment to consult could be construed or perceived by other countries in the region, especially by China. This is the beginning of a trilateral military alliance, similar to the one that you see in Europe in the form of NATO. And then China has been very critical of such efforts by the United States and other countries in the region. So this separate document, Commitment to Consult, clarifies what this commitment to consult entails. It limits the scope, basically, says that this is not a substitute or something analogous to a treaty. So essentially, there's no obligation in the sense that the mutual defense treaty assigns to the signatories. So meaning that there's no automatic obligation to consult about security contingency, but there's a political obligation, so to speak. So it's a political obligation. So it means that as long as the three countries have a like-minded approach towards a security situation, then there will be a natural opportunity to consult about this issue. But if there's a much more sensitive situation for some reason, and then the any one of these countries can, in fact, hypothetically speaking, turn down essentially the other country's request to consult. So it's a low level of obligation than a treaty obligation. So this is, in a way, more of a message to China and then by extension to North Korea that this Camp David agreement is not it has not been put in place, targeting these countries in mind. So this is purely about joint security cooperation.
Then would it be difficult to say that this commitment to consult has the aroma of alliance?
Well, it is an alliance, but then what this document is saying that it's a low-level alliance. This is not a specific military alliance targeting a specific country in this case.
Right, I see. Now, Mr. Huevin, with the three countries' ties having become stronger than ever before, what do you expect North Korea's next diplomatic move to be?
Well, from the North Korean perspective, seeing South Korea, Japan, and the United States so closely aligned and more confrontational towards them, at least that's their perception, ironically, that is a gift from the heavens for them. They can now legitimize nationally and internationally that going nuclear was the right choice for them to secure their interests. So what North Korea will do now, first, they will continue to invest in their nuclear and missile deterrent. They will not give up their nuclear weapons. They will not denuclearize, and they will not negotiate over this. Second, they will let their people know that the economy is bad, but more hardships are coming because of the United States and South Korea and Japan's confrontational standing towards them. And they have already done this in their press statements that they're now stating that we are ever more closer to a thermonuclear war. So they will continue to ramp up this rhetoric. And lastly, I think they will move more closely to the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation in order to secure their geostrategic interests, but also their economic lifeline.
Right, I see. So, Mr. Huevin, so North Korea resuming flights to Beijing and having high expectations that the overland travel is going to return to normal. Those could be kind of measures to bolster ties with China, right?
Yes, exactly. That's what we're seeing right now. The country has been closed off since COVID-19. They're gradually opening up, but they're opening up for what they consider the right allies.
Right, I see. Now, Dr. Go, moving on to the recent police report, a state-backed North Korean hacking group, Kim Soo-ki, was found to have carried out cyber attacks targeting the combined military drills. First of all, what is this group? So,
Kim Soo-ki is one of the best-known North Korean state-sponsored hacking group. So the other one is Lazarus. Lazarus has been behind many of the heists against cryptocurrency exchanges and digital wallets. But then Kim Soo-ki is just as old as Lazarus. The first instance that Kim Soo-ki showed up in the experts radar, the experts on cybersecurity have found about Kim Soo-ki's activities. It has been 2012. So it's more than 10 years since Kim Soo-ki started its activities. Both Kim Soo-ki and Lazarus belong to the Reconnaissance General Bureau, which is it's a special reconnaissance intelligence bureau of the North Korean military. And then even though we call them Kim Soo-ki and Lazarus, clearly in North Korea they are not known as Kim Soo-ki and Lazarus. These are terms of convenience assigned by the cybersecurity experts. And the reason why we call them Kim Soo-ki is kind of interesting because one of the earlier campaigns conducted by Kim Soo-ki used an email address called Kim Soo-kyang, which is spelled Kim Soo-ki plus A-N-G. And then the foreign experts who are looking into this email address decided to name this particular group Kim Soo-ki, or shorthand for Kim Soo-kyang. So it's a term of convenience, obviously. And then unlike Lazarus, though, Kim Soo-ki has evolved, not really evolved, actually maintained the original mission of a state-sponsored hacking group targeting mostly defense contractors, government agencies, as well as foreign militaries, meaning in this case the United States. And they focus mostly on the intelligence gathering as well as vandalism. For instance, Kim Soo-ki was behind hacking into South Korea's hydro and nuclear power agency, and then they store blueprints for nuclear reactors, for instance. So what Kim Soo-ki is doing right now is a classic North Korean hacking activities, and they're trying to gather the information on the ongoing Ulchi Freedom Shield exercises.
Right, but in that case, is there any way we can deal with this kind of cyber attacks?
So this is behind the recent agreement reached between South Korea and the United States, the strategic framework on cybersecurity cooperation that came out in the aftermath of the summit between President Yoon and President Biden in April. So this is exactly what we are trying to do. Essentially, the South Korea and the United States are joining forces in cyberspace to detect this kind of hacking activities by sharing information. This is very important. Sharing information is not just like a protocol or like just an the nominal activity. It's very important to share information about hacking groups because so essentially it's like on any information technology issues. So by having more information, we can have more information about the other side. So this is the idea that we are trying to prevent, not just defend against North Korean attacks, hacking attacks, but prevent North Korean hacking attacks by preempting and then forecasting their next move. And so I think the fact that the South Korea and the United States are joining forces in cyberspace, as well as in all other domains, are going to act as a deterrence against North Korean hacking activities. And then in fact, that's exactly what happened this time. North Korea has essentially penetrated one of the contractors that are involved in the planning, the joint military drills for this year. But then their activities stopped when then the North Koreans tried to use their the fact that the computers infected through these activities with the contractors, and in turn they tried to hack the USFK computers. That's when the United States stepped in and then shared information with South Korea, and then South Korea has been able to essentially solve this situation. So this is an instance of South Korea and the United States working together to deter attacks by hacking groups such as Kim Soo-ki.
Right, I see. Now, Mr. Huibin, let's also talk about the UNSC meeting. So the UNSC held a rare meeting on North Korea's human rights issues, which was the first open meeting of the 15-member council since 2017. How did it open and what significance did it have?
The United Nations Security Council meeting again showed that we're moving towards this blockization of geopolitics. While the subject of human rights abuses was put on the Security Council agenda, both China and the Russian Federation, more than ever, protested against this agenda item. They called it an unnecessary provocation, an escalation, and they were really sticking up for DPRK quite vocally, actually. Now, I personally believe that putting human rights on the agenda is of utmost importance, especially the situation in North Korea. The knowledge needs to get out there. At the same time, I'm a free trade politician, and I believe the best way to improve human rights is to facilitate trade amongst nations across the world. And history has shown that where there's free trade, there's interdependence, there's more stability, more economic opportunities, and improved livelihoods for the people, most importantly. And I think in general, if we want to improve human rights, we should move away from confrontation, go back to the policies of late President Kim Dae-jung, for example. We need to start negotiating to increase trade, promise the allure of free trade, try to create a level playing field to increase economic prosperity. I mean, in my country, we have elections coming up, and I think there will also be elections in South Korea next year in 2024. For the people, these will be pocketbook elections. Both of our countries are still very much dependent on trade and also trade with China. So we as politicians and policymakers, we have to take responsibility. We have to put forward an agenda of policies where we decrease confrontation, increase free trade, so that our people, as well as the people in other countries, will have a better life.
Right, I see your point. Now, Dr. Go, we are running out of time, but I'd like to ask you this last question. So all three countries, South Korea, US, and Japan, are going to be members of the UNSC next year, 2024. How will this further enable them to work together against North Korea?
So I think one of the prime areas that the three countries could have some sort of impact on the ongoing UN activities, especially regarding North Korea, will be in the field of human rights. Unlike sanctions requires a resolution by the Security Council, and then China and Russia clearly are exercising veto power to protect North Korea. With the human rights issue, you can actually take this issue to the General Assembly, where the simple majority will essentially issuing a resolution condemning North Korean activities. And because we know human rights issue, naming and shaming rather than actual sanctions could kind of just as a big impact as real sanctions. I think that this is a prime area where the three countries can work together to sway the public opinion, or at least remind the global public opinion of the grave human rights violations that are taking place in the country.
Right, I see. Well, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Dr. Gov't, for your time.
My pleasure.
And thank you, Mr. Hueben, for your time and insights as well. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
I'm live!
저를 도와주시는 분들이
저희와 함께 해주시는 세션분들
아무리 봐도 이거 없지 텐션 같은데 아니라고 아무도 안 하는 거고